exactly. Okay, so right, it's been a long journey. We're 12 weeks into this. This is now coming down to the final couple of lectures. So here we go. There are three kind of sections to today's lecture. The first is looking at a place for character. So if you recall way back at the beginning, I put up this spider diagram of saying, this is what science is. Under the Enlightenment vision, this is what we wanted science to be. And over a series of lectures, we became very disappointed with this. But now, just to sort of put the final nail in the coffin, we're going to come full circle, and we're just going to take this apart one more time, just to make sure it's clear that this doesn't work. Here we go. So looking at scientific knowledge. Now, clearly, scientific knowledge is not true, or is not held at all times about all questions, because half the people on this course don't have huge amounts of scientific knowledge, because knowledge is something that's in your head, and most people haven't ever sat a course on relativistic quantum mechanics. So let's now look specifically at scientific knowledge rather than this nebulous thing of science. So we're coming down to the stuff that's between your ears. So in the Enlightenment vision, this is independent of your character, of your opinions. It's demonstrable, it's true for all people. So let's look at a piece of knowledge, like how to grow a pineapple. So I can't see I can't see anyone's faces actually, apart from David's, because you've all got your cameras off. So normally I'd ask for a quick show of hands, but here we go. Like, just stick a quick hello in the chat box if you know how to grow a pineapple. And for those of you who don't know how to grow a pineapple, okay, here's what you do. You start off with we have someone in the chat box. Who knows how to? Oh, I can't read the. How can I read the? There you go. Okay, at least one person doesn't know how to do it. Okay, so here's how you do it. Good, right. So you start off, you can go to the shop and you can buy yourself a pineapple. Chicken and egg, don't ask where the pineapple came from. It occurs magically, and now we're going to follow its life cycle through. So eat the pineapple and leave the top, okay? Pull off the leaves and then put it in water, and it will grow roots. So you can see here are the roots. This is the top of my pineapple. Here are the roots growing out. And once you've got some roots, what you do is you put it in soil and wait for it to grow. So now these leaves, these are the old leaves that you can sort of see, the old dried ones there. And now you grow some lovely fresh green leaves. And after a while, these couple of leaves turn into something that's much bigger. And you have to repot it, of course, because these leaves are now properly large. And then once you've done that, up from the middle, this is really weird. If you've never seen it before, this is completely freaky. You're like, where does a pineapple come from? I used to imagine them sort of, hanging down from pineapple trees, maybe. But no, not at all. So you have this bush here, and up out the middle, you get this stalk that has flowers on it. They're really cool. And just for those of you, here we go. Can I do this? For those of you who want to see live, can I show you? There you go. That's this year's pineapple for me. I'm very pleased with this. And the significance of having a pineapple this year is going to come in just a moment. There you go. And it grows. So it starts off very small. You have these lovely little purple flowers on it. And then it grows, and you have something that starts to look like a pineapple. And at the end, you harvest it, and you have a very, very happy small child who's pleased to harvest his pineapple. And one of the reasons why this particular boy is happy to harvest his pineapple is he planted this pineapple. In this picture, he is 5 years old. If he was in this picture, he would be 3 years old, because you plant it and you have to wait 2 years for it to actually fruit. And when you are 5 years old, 2 years is a very long time to have waited. And when you're 3 years old, being told you have to wait 2 years is an exceptionally long time. But here we go. So when I tell people about my pineapples, I do like my pineapples. Often they say, I wouldn't have the patience for that. I can go to M Price and it takes me like 5 minutes walk down the road and then 3 minutes in a queue and I've got a pineapple. I could never wait 2 years for a pineapple. And so here's the question. If you've seen this, You know, factually speaking, the steps that it takes to grow a pineapple. But that's not the same as knowing how to grow a pineapple, because part of knowing how to grow a pineapple is knowing how to sit and wait for 2 years. And while there may be things in the Hong Kong education system which provide you with pictures and YouTube videos of how to grow a pineapple, there's also almost nothing in the Hong Kong education system which teaches you how to sit patiently for 2 years and watch nothing happen. So that's a sort of how-to. And so a question, if I ask you a question like, do you know what it tastes like to have your own homegrown pineapple? And for almost all of you, given that you didn't know how to grow a pineapple, the answer is no. And I promise you that your own homegrown pineapple does not taste the same as the one that you bought from the shop, because grown with love, they're the sweetest, juicy, the most wonderful thing you can imagine. Except possibly if you've never grown your own, you can't imagine it. You have no frame of reference for something that good. There is something which an impatient person cannot know. They cannot know how to grow their own pineapple. And they cannot learn how to grow their own pineapple without becoming a patient person. Now, this is true for lots of knowing how. You cannot know how to play the New World Symphony on the piano without being the kind of person who has the tenacity and diligence to spend an hour a day for the last 4 years practicing learning to play the piano. So learning how involves inculcating within you the character for just sticking at it. This is why we learn the piano, not because we're going to become rich and famous as a pianist, because most people are not. And yet we learn the piano. Part of learning the piano is because it makes us human. It makes us patient. It makes us diligent. It raises our eyes beyond the immediate return to something which is greater. And in science, if you say, do you know this transition frequency for a particular atom, there are three answers. One is, yes, I know it, I read it in a book. And you say, well, do you know that book is true? Have you checked it for yourself? And if you're asked whether you've checked it for yourself, whether you actually know it because you've done it rather than just knowing it because a book said it, if you are not the kind of person who can stick at learning physics for 7 years, you will never have measured a particular atomic transition for yourself. Someone who doesn't have the patience to do that doesn't know firsthand this transition frequency. The best you can do is you can say, I read it in a book, and someone says, do you trust that book? Do you have evidence that any of the transition frequencies is true? And you say, well, there was a bloke that I spoke to that said he'd measure it and he agreed with the book. The knowledge in your head is either taken on blind faith or semi-blind faith, or it is knowledge that belongs to a person who is patient and diligent and has the character in them to spend 7 years learning how to use a laser. So scientific knowledge is not independent of a person's character, and it is not available to all people. It is only available to people who have the patience, who sit and do it. And there are other character traits which necessarily go along with learning particular things. Any given epistemic collection of information has with it virtues which are required to establish in you in order for you to know that information. So, next part of my 3-part talk. So we have science is a place for character. It's also a place for not knowing. Having established that there are certain things that you cannot know without character, let's actually say that strictly speaking, there's a whole pile of things that you cannot know. Now this is riffing on something that we said previously, but it's worth drawing out here. So again, in our early spider diagram, we said, okay, this should be certain. Now, those of you who've been paying attention for the last 11 weeks know where this is going. That doesn't work. So let's look at the place of certainty and how this has changed over the last, say, 100 years. So if we look at someone like A.J. Carlson, writing in 1931, I think I can't see my slide there because Zoom has covered it up. But this is about the time that Quine was writing. This is where Quine drops his bombshell that says, under determination bites us, and we cannot be certain of any single fact. But Carlson didn't know that, so he was certain of his fact. What a shame. So he says the scientist tries to rid himself of all faiths and beliefs. Either he knows or he does not know. If he knows, there is no room for faith and belief, and if he does not know, he has no right to faith and belief, right? Carlson's knowledge was a certain, sure, guaranteed knowledge, and if it wasn't sure and certain and guaranteed, it wasn't knowledge. And this was completely in line with the joys of modernism and the Enlightenment. This sort of hit its height at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And about the time that Carlson was writing, people like Quine, whom we've spoken about, suddenly said, actually, it's more complicated. And then people like Lakatos and people like Loudon and people like Kuhn and people, a whole pile of people that we've mentioned throughout the stage of this course, came and said, no, certainty doesn't work. Such that we reach the point now with Feynman, writing 70 years later, who says it is imperative for science to doubt. It is absolutely necessary for progress in science to have uncertainty as the fundamental part of your inner nature. So somewhere in this 70-year gap, we've gone from science rests on certainty to science requires uncertainty. We require doubt. And Feynman goes on to say it's impossible to find an answer which someday will not be found wrong. And if Carlson was unsure of the truth of what Feynman says, we can look at the answer that Carlson had, namely that one must be certain in science, and find that within a few years of him writing that it was found to be wrong. So we have this need for uncertainty. So let's look at this, because I'm going to get this now to something that's more interactive. So you'll notice there's a live talk. We're going to get some, I wanted to do this live rather than video because I want some interaction. So here we go. We've discussed previously noumena. You've seen the situation with a wing where we treat it with a fluid, just laminar flow going over the wing, or where it's particles that hit the wing. And this is an example that we've trotted out previously. So I want you guys to turn on your cameras now. I want as many cameras as possible. And here's the deal, right? Raise your left hand if you think that lift is caused by air molecules hitting a wing, and raise your right hand if you think lift is caused by something other than air molecules hitting a wing. And bear in mind that Richard Feynman says, just to make this kind of exciting, Richard Feynman says it's impossible to have any scientific answer which will not be shown to be wrong. So left hand caused by them hitting a wing, right hand, how many? Okay, so we've got a couple of cameras. Right, so now just to make this really exciting, okay, this is what I'm going to say. Okay, Steve is now looking at who's raising hands. Okay, anyone who gets the correct answer gets plus 1% on their final grade. Okay, more cameras coming on, good. And anyone who gets the wrong answer is going to get 1% off their final grade. And now we see people start to turn their cameras off. How very strange. Right? Yes. What's the point in doing this if all of a sudden, as soon as there are stakes in the game, they turn their cameras off? Right. So here we have a situation now. Okay, you can put your hands down now. And yeah. Okay, so Steve, you've got the names. You know who got what. Good. So now here's the situation we face. And this is a question that in the Q&A that you guys have been submitting by email, this is something that a lot of you are wrestling with, that says, okay, if I cannot prove this to be true, and I cannot prove this to be true, and I cannot prove this to be untrue, and I cannot prove this to be untrue, then why do I get out of bed in the morning? Why do I bother? Why do we bother? Just, we can be agnostic. We can say, I don't know whether God exists or whether God doesn't exist. I don't know whether I should be a Baha'i or a Christian. I don't know whether vaccines work or not. So I'm just going to be agnostic because I cannot know. Why do we bother with trying to know the truth given we can't know the truth? So, and this is so we have this problem that we face where with Richard Feynman we say whatever science tells us, it's probably going to turn out to be wrong. And so a lot of you, some of you said, okay, it's left hand, and some of you said it's right hand, and a lot of you, when suddenly there was skin in the game, said, aha, hidden answer number 3. Keep your hand down, keep stum. Don't risk it. Don't risk it. I'm happy to just stick with the grade I've got. There's hidden answer number 3, which is don't raise a hand at all. And this is the agnostic position. Rather than becoming a Baha'i or becoming a Christian, I'm going to remain agnostic and I'm not going to become an anything. Now, this is where we hit part 3 of the talk, which is a place for commitment. So I'm going to, now, this is William James, wonderful pragmatist, said in the left hand, right hand, this is not a forced choice, right? You don't say, well, okay, I'm either going to be a Baha'i or a Christian, but then there's hidden answer number 3 that says I can be an agnostic, and hidden answer number 4 that says I can be a Jew, and hidden answer number 5 that says I can just read all of them and hope that I pick up something, right? So this binary choice, this or this, I don't need to choose. I don't need to pick. But what happens if I make you choose? So I'm going to do a new way of doing this. Okay, if you think that lift is caused by air molecules hitting a wing, raise your left hand. Turn your camera on and raise your left hand. Steve is watching. And if you think it's caused by something other than it hitting the wing, raise your right hand. And the reward system is as follows. So all turn your cameras on. If your camera is on, you get 1% extra on your final grade. And if your camera is off, you get 1% less on your final grade. Right. Now, so previously said, I have hidden option 3. I'll take hidden option 3, that is, I'm not going to turn my camera on. But now we see this option here, on or off. This is a forced choice. There isn't any third option of being agnostic. You can't just say, I'm going to sit this one out, because it's one or the other, and there is no other option. So now this is an example. Steve's not going to knock things off your grade. I just for the purpose of, hopefully you'll remember this one. Just the raised blood pressure is going to just etch this one in your mind as to how insane your lecturers are. But okay, so I'm not, and all of a sudden all the cameras go off again. Good, fine. So it's not going to count towards the final grade. But here you go. This situation with just left hand, right hand, you don't have to choose. You can sit it out. But with camera on or camera off, there is no hidden third option. You have to nail your colors to the mast. You have to pick one. And so this is what William James said. He said, what if we are forced to say or do something? So the example he used, he said, right, let's take being in a ship. Now I want a volunteer who's prepared to talk to me and reason through a situation with me. So who wants wait, turn your mic on. Hopefully you've got good enough bandwidth, and talk to me if you want to join me for a discussion.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Yash. Okay, good. So let's imagine you're on a boat. And now when I usually do this in person, we act out, we do a skit, and it's lots of fun, but you're going to have to imagine now. Okay, so you're on a boat, and the boat is kind of old and creaky, but there's a life ring, and there's a lifeboat on the side of your boat. Now, a storm comes, and you look at the boat that you're in. Here's a picture of it, and you think, this might collapse, okay? Do you stay on the boat, or do you get on the life ring, or do you get into the lifeboat? What do you do?
I mean, it depends on the quality of the lifeboat, but if it's a good lifeboat, then I'd go for that.
Okay, so there's a certificate on the lifeboat that says, you know, this was safety checked last year, and it was seaworthy last year.
What am I doing?
So would you get in a lifeboat, or would you stay on your boat, or would you go for life ring?
I mean, if there are other people on the boat and like they seem confident in like it getting across, then I'd stay on the boat.
Okay.
If it's just me and like some dude is in the cabin, then I'd go on the lifeboat.
So you go on the lifeboat, okay? But like maybe you know it sprung a leak sometime in the last year, so you don't know the lifeboat is safe. So why would you get in a lifeboat when you don't know it's safe?
Well, I don't know if this ship is safe either, but it's more probable that the lifeboat is safe.
Well, how do you like? I mean, how many? So more probable. So that says if you had 100 identical storms, right? And or 200 identical storms, and in 100 of them you were in the lifeboat, and in 100 of them you were in the ship, you'd count how many of them you drowned in, and you'd say, okay, well, I drowned 60% of the time in the main boat, and I drowned 70% of the time in the lifeboat, so the lifeboat is less seaworthy, so I'm going to say, what do you mean the probability? You can't, this is not a repeat experiment.
Fair enough, but if the boat has been verified by someone and they did a fine enough job, like it's more likely than not that that boat is fine.
Right, okay.
It's like
what if I tell you that the day before, because I'm a prankster, I'd gotten into the boat and I drilled a hole in the bottom of the boat, just under the seat where you can't see it. So it was totally unseaworthy, but I didn't obviously update the manifest to say this has been hijacked.
So I mean, if you told me, then I wouldn't go.
Okay, what if I'd done that, but I didn't tell you I'd done that?
Then I would go.
You would go. Okay, but you might drown.
Yeah, I might drown on the boat, on my original boat as well.
Okay, so why don't you, given you could drown either way, why don't you remain agnostic?
Because I think that my chances of survival are higher in the lifeboat.
Okay, even though you don't have any, I mean, you can't get data, right? If you're a good scientist, you'd say, I'm going to find 100 identical storms and do this multiple times, right? But clearly you're not a good scientist.
Pretty bad one.
So you're not going to say, I need scientific evidence. You're going to say, I don't have scientific evidence, and there are lots of reasons why I might be wrong, but I'm going to trust my life to this lifeboat anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like it's almost not intuitive, but it's like there is some reasoning behind it. Like it's been verified by someone a year ago. Sure, that's a long ass time, but that's a long time. But it's more probable that that boat is fine than this creaky old ship making it to the start.
Okay, so there's someone else on the boat with you, and they went on a lifeboat before, and they had a friend who made these certificates, and their friend worked for a different company, but they were drunk half the time they were doing the certificates, so they don't trust lifeboat certificates. But you didn't have that friend, so would they be reasonable in avoiding the lifeboat like the plague?
Not necessarily, because because one person does not speak, like one lifeboat inspector does not speak for every other lifeboat inspector. They're different. And it seems like in most cases, lifeboat inspectors aren't drunk. So
do you know? How many lifeboat inspectors do you know?
No, but if they were drunk, then we'd hear more cases of lifeboats not being able to save people.
Have you ever heard of the Titanic?
Yes, and the
Every
lifeboat.
single lifeboat story I've ever heard. Like, you see a lifeboat story on the news, and the news doesn't say boat sinks, everyone gets to safety. It's always like boat sinks, everyone dies, Titanic Mark 3. Right?
Not everyone died on the Titanic.
True. At least James Cameron lived long enough to make a film about it. Hang on, no. Okay, good. So here we go. So thanks very much, Yash. I enjoyed the discussion. So let's try and see if I can go back and look at my own slides. Okay, so here's the problem that we face, right? Yash has to do something, right? He cannot know that the lifeboat is safe. He cannot know it. He can't wait for the scientific evidence to come in. He has to act, and to stay on the boat is to make a decision, and to get into the lifeboat is to make a decision, and to go for the life belt is to make a decision. And there is no decision. There is no agnostic situation. And if he says, okay, I'm going to get into the lifeboat even though I don't know, he is in his mind agnostic, but in his actions, he acts as though the lifeboat were the thing that he should get into. And so, in some sense, it doesn't matter what he knows and what he believes, because if he believes that the lifeboat might kill him, but he gets in the lifeboat anyway, then he's acted as though the lifeboat might save him. In fact, he's acted as though the lifeboat is more likely to save him than the actual boat. So whatever his principled beliefs are, he can't, he says, okay, 70% likely to do this and 30% likely to do that, but he can't 30% get into the lifeboat. He can't say, right, my leg is in the lifeboat and the rest of me is on the main ship, right? He has to do one or the other. He has to act as though something were true, even though he doesn't know whether that thing is true. So here we go. So while one can be based on the evidence or lack of evidence, while one can say, I am agnostic, I do not know whether I should believe in God or not believe in God. To fail to turn up to church on Sunday is to act as though God didn't mind whether or not or is to act as though there wasn't a God who minded whether or not you turned up to church on a Sunday. Now, maybe there is no God. Maybe there is a God, but God doesn't care whether you go to church on Sunday. Maybe there is a God and he really cares whether you go to church on a Sunday. But to be agnostic and to say, I'm not going to turn up on church on a Sunday, is, regardless of your knowledge and beliefs, to act as though it is true that there is no God who wants you to go to church on a Sunday. If you say, I don't know whether the vaccine will kill me or not, and I don't know whether I'm more likely to die from vaccine or COVID or side effects of vaccine, you might not know, but you cannot not act. You either take the vaccine or you don't take the vaccine. And by taking it or not taking it, you act as though something were the case, regardless of whether you believe that is the case, and regardless of whether you know that is the case. So we've now changed our question. Rather than saying, how do we know this is true? We're now asking, how do I know, how can I know whether my lifeboat is safe? Well, I can do 100 repeat trials, except I can't do 100 repeat trials. So now I have to say, rather than how do I know this is true, the question becomes, how do I decide what to believe? And how do I act based on what I have come to believe? And these are not the same questions as, how can I show this thing to be true? Now, so I've given examples of vaccines, and I've given examples of ships, and I've given examples of religion. So let's see what happens with theory choice in science. Excuse me one second. let's imagine I have an equation here. And it's okay, I'm not going to raise or lower your final grade depending on whether or not you can recite this equation. So here's an equation. That's actually, this has got, or a variant on this equation has hit the news recently. But here we go. Hopefully after this slide, you'll understand why it's hit the news. So here we go. So this is my magnetic moment of my electron. And this is a Bohr magneton. This is Planck's constant. This is the spin of my particle. And this is called the electron G factor. And none of that is important except for the fact that physicists are interested to know what this number is. And there are different theories in physics that have different answers as to what this number is. Now, classical mechanics says this is 1. Nice round number, it's 1. You can drop it from the equation, or you can just write 1 here, and it's the same. Okay. Now, quantum mechanics, here's my electron, which is doing something wavy, particle-y, hitting a screen. Fine. This says that my electron G factor is 2. And so I have classical mechanics that says 1 and quantum mechanics that says 2. And you say, well, that's not a problem, right? Because we can do an experiment and we can, there's theory 1, theory 2. How do I choose between them? I'm going to do an experiment and I'm going to work out which one it is. Fine. But now when I do an experiment, I walk into the lab and I have to say, right, let me set up this laser in order to measure what my atom is doing, in order to blah, 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 blah. Right? But in order to set up my laser, I need to do a little bit of theory. And I say, right, well, do I use classical theory to set up my laser, or do I use quantum theory to set up my laser? Or given I don't know which theory is right, how do I establish which theory is right without choosing in advance which theory is right? Now I have, let's say, and these numbers are completely made up for reasons we'll get to later. Let's say I think 10% chance that it's Newtonian mechanics and 90% chance that it's classical mechanics. Okay, like Yash, right? And so the way I established those numbers was I made 100 universes, and in 10 of those universes they were run by the laws of classical physics, and in 90 of those universes they were run by the laws of quantum mechanics. And no, I didn't do that experiment at all. That's not how physics works. But imagine we can come up with some numbers. So I have these numbers, and here's what I say. I say, right, because it's 10% chance of being quantum mechanics, I'm going to use G equals 1 10% of the time. So every experiment I do on a Monday morning, I'm going to assume that E equals 1. And from Monday lunchtime through to Friday evening, I'm going to use G equals 2. Now, that's not how science works. Option 2, I'm going to say, okay, weighted average, right? It's most likely to be 2, but it might be a bit of 1. So I'm going to say it's like 1.9. Like if it was 50-50 mixed, I'd say it's 1.5, because that's like straight between the two. But weighted average, I'm going to say all of my calculations, it's got 1.9. Or I can say it's 2. All of my calculations, every single calculation, I'm just going to slap in the fact that it's 2. Now, hopefully, for those scientists and engineers out there among you, you guys know what people do in this situation. And what people do is they say, I'm going to use the number 2. Every single calculation, I'm just going to slap in 2. I'm going to assume that quantum mechanics is right in order to do my tests to establish whether or not quantum mechanics is right. And that seems a bit fishy, right? That's like, I'm going to assume that God, I'm a Christian, and I'm going to establish that God exists, starting from the assumption that God exists. And most philosophers would come up to me and go, that's everything that's wrong with religion. This is why religion is rubbish, right? You can't assume that God exists in order to prove that God exists. And lo and behold, what do scientists do? Scientists assume quantum mechanics is true so that they can do the calculations to set up their experiments to demonstrate whether or not quantum mechanics is true. And we pretend this is good science. So this is where it gets freaky. We assume it's 2, and we go away and do the measurement, assuming quantum mechanics is right, and we get the answer, not 2. So having assumed quantum mechanics is true, we managed to show that quantum mechanics is false. Now, if I'd have said, I refuse to choose between one or the other until I've done the experiment to know which one is true, I would never have got this result. I would never have gone into the lab. I would have never have set up my laser. I spend, not me, but other scientists, spend 20 years assuming quantum mechanics is true every day in order to get to the point where they understand quantum mechanics well enough, in order to get to the point where they can show that it's wrong. And so what they then do is they come up with a new theory, which says that it's almost 2. It's really, really almost 2. And in fact, it's just a little bit above 2. And in order to make this measurement, they assume that this theory is true. They don't say, I don't know whether it's true. They say, I'm going to assume it's true. And assuming it's true, I'm going to make this measurement. And the reason why this number has hit the news recently is at the beginning of this month, there was a big experiment in Fermilab. There was an odd result that they got, not for electrons, but muons, which are like electrons, just heavier. And 20 years ago, there was an experiment done in Berkeley where they said, we've got this measurement and we've made this measurement, and assuming this model, which is the best ever scientific theory we've ever come up with, is true, we get the wrong answer. And so the guys in Fermilab built another experiment, and they spent 10 years running this experiment and vast sums of money running this experiment, and they managed to show, on the assumption that this is true, we've managed to show that we get a different result from what we'd expect. So the way science works is science says we don't know whether it's true or not, but there's no way to find out whether it's true until we act as though it's true. So scientists act as though the standard model of particle physics is true, even though they don't know it's true, because until they presume it's true and act as though it's true, they'll never find out whether it is or not. So this was summed up by Polanyi. He said, do not seek to understand in order to believe, but believe so that you may understand. Right? Don't say, I'm not going to believe quantum mechanics until I've understood quantum mechanics. Say, I have to believe quantum mechanics because unless I do that, there is no way to understand quantum mechanics. And only once I've believed it will I understand it. Now, he said this in the context of science, though plagiarism alert, it wasn't his idea. He shamelessly plagiarized it. For those of you that know Latin, from Anselm of Canterbury, who was a theologian, who wasn't saying in 1078, he wasn't saying this is how we approach science. He was saying this is how we approach religion. Unless you immerse yourself in a belief system, you will never find your way around inside that belief system in order to establish whether or not that belief system is completely cockeyed or not. And for what it's worth, Anselm of Canterbury also plagiarized it from Augustine of Hippo 600 years earlier. And Augustine of Hippo, for what it's worth, was also a theologian. So this had been knocking around for 1,600 years among theologians before a scientist stood up and went, you know, this is how science needs to work. I wonder what would happen if scientists spent more time listening to theologians. Maybe we'd have come up with more developments in science 1,000 years earlier. Discuss. So here we go. So this is the basic idea. We have this idea that says believe without evidence, without knowing, in order to actually obtain something that looks and feels at least a little bit like evidence. And if you don't start with belief, you'll never get to understand. And this is how science works and needs to work. And this is how religion works and needs to work. Now, the problem, of course, is, as with quantum mechanics turned out to be wrong, but we had to commit ourselves to that wrongness. We had to commit ourselves to the risk of talking complete nonsense in order to say anything at all. Now, here's a question. What does it mean to commit? How do I know what I'm signing up for? If I say you need to commit yourself to this, if I say you need to spend 20 years trying to establish whether or not quantum mechanics is true, you need to commit yourself to this. How do I know what I'm signing myself up for? What I want to do is I want to learn about quantum mechanics. And before I can do that, I need to commit to quantum mechanics. And it would be really nice if I could just do that. But I cannot, because I need to submit myself to the rigors of quantum mechanics. I cannot learn how to grow a pineapple before I have committed to growing a pineapple and submitting to the process of patience, of watering, of diligent daily care. Now, when I submit to this, so here we go. So this is my process of growing a pineapple. And pineapples, unfortunately, if you say you want to learn what it's like, what it tastes like to taste your very own homegrown pineapple, but you cannot learn that. You cannot learn what it's like to be this happy, right? You can look at that and you say, yeah, he looks pretty happy, but you cannot experience the happiness of harvesting your own pineapple without first committing to the process and submitting to the universe that says, I'm not going to let you harvest this until you've put in the work. The universe won't let you do it. You have to have the humility to submit to the universe. If I can personify the universe for a second, you have to have the humility of submitting to the universe in order to learn what that's like. Now, how about something science, our standard example with climate change? If I want to learn what this graph means, I can do that, but I have to commit to learning. I have to commit 6 years of my life to sitting down and understanding what this means. And I have to submit to the process. I will only be admitted to a PhD program where I have someone to sit down and really explain it to me if I submit to the process of Hong Kong U that says you need to do exams. You need to stay up late at night. You need to learn to drink more coffee than is possibly healthy for you. And until we have inculcated in you the value of late nights and cramming for exams, you will never know what this graph means. Unless you've learnt a particular way of talking, a particular kind of language, a particular discipline, a particular set of values, until you know this epistemic community and are engaged fully with this epistemic community and accept the standards of this community, you will never know this. And if you start over here and you say, well, can you explain it, what I'm letting myself in for? They say no. The way to understand what you're letting yourself in for is to come in here. There is no way to get to here apart from in here. And we cannot tell you on the outside what is going to happen in here, because only people who have submitted to the process can get here. Now, this, of course, as well as being known as scientific community, is known as a cult, right? In any other context, if you see this, you need to wear a lab coat like us. You don't understand why the lab coat is important, but unless you wear the same clothes as us, unless you talk the same language as us, unless you promise to give up your life and vast sums of money to us, we're not going to explain these higher truths to you. That's a cult. Now, of course, it's not just a cult. There are also religions that do this. In fact, every single religion does this. I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying cults also do it, and I'm saying universities also do it. Here we go. If you want to understand this, if you want to understand God, if you want to understand what he requires of you, if you want to understand how he interacts with you, if you want to understand what it's like to commune with God, what you have to do is you have to commit to the process. You cannot turn up and say, give me a 15-minute YouTube video on what it means to commune with God. No, you need to commit to it and you need to submit to it. If someone says, the Hajj is just ridiculous, what do you gain from walking in a circle around this big black box? Anyone in their right mind understands that it's just a whole load of guys walking around in a circle. There is nothing deep and spiritual about this. And this guy can say to you, it is not just walking around in a circle. And you say, well, what is it if it's not just walking around in circles? I cannot explain it to you until you have committed to the process and submitted to the process, until you have forked out for your airline ticket to go to Mecca. You need to put in the time, the effort, the commitment, the discipline, the moral virtues which accompany learning this knowledge, and the cash which is accompanied with the air ticket, which is accompanied with learning with this knowledge. And once you have committed and submitted, you can learn this higher knowledge. Now, does this mean that Islam, which for what it's worth means submission, is a cult? No, not at all. No more than Hong Kong U is a cult. Is Hong Kong U a cult? Discuss. Here we go. So before I get arrested for this, okay, I need to stop here. Okay, so here we go. So scientific knowledge. Here we are. This is what we started with at the beginning of the course. Okay, so I'm going to get to objectivity in a second, right? But scientific knowledge is not independent of your character. There are certain things that only people with certain character traits can know. And anyone who does not have that character trait cannot get that knowledge. It is not known with certainty, and yet we have to accept that knowledge, even given the uncertainty, and we have to act as though it were true. We cannot demonstrate it, which is to say we can only demonstrate it to be true to people who have joined in with this epistemic community, who have committed to believing it to be true and acting as though it's true. And after that process, then they say, yes, I believe this is true. And if that looks really circular and like it's a cult or a pyramid scheme or proving the assumptions in the first place, well, it's not that far from it. And this is how science works. Now, Polanyi, whom I've been citing quite a bit in this, so he looks at the passion. So, you know, the Enlightenment thought that we have to strip passion out of science. And Polanyi looked at this. He says, personal knowledge in science commits us passionately and far beyond our comprehension to a vision of reality. Of this responsibility, we cannot divest ourselves by setting up objective criteria of verifiability or falsifiability of what you will. For we live in this garment as in a for we live in this as in a garment of our own skin, like love to which is akin. This commitment is a shirt of flame, blazing with passion, and also like love, consumed by devotion to a universal demand. So this is Polanyi speaking about science. This is his objectivity in science. Now, if science starts to look like a zealot pursuing a religious goal, well, discuss. We're going to come to this in the next lecture, exactly how these ideas fit together. But this idea that somehow science is abstract, removed, from which we don't have to commit ourselves to it and utterly buy into the claims until we've demonstrated it and proved it. And religion is this thing where we just sell out and believe that which we haven't yet proved. Well, Polanyi at least says, no, science is very different to that. So let me summarize this course, if I may. I cannot discover anything, sorry, not this course, this 3 lectures. I cannot discover anything as a scientist unless I first commit to believing a particular theory and submit to the authority of those who would teach me. I cannot express to other people what I thereby learn by this process of committing, nor can they comprehend it unless they too commit to the theory and submit to the teachers. The commitment to this theory includes a moral commitment to the virtues required by the knowledge. The knowledge presses on me its own moral system, and I cannot know it unless I accept the moral requirements. And I can never be certain of the rightness of the theory I follow, and yet I must still act like it is true and risk all for it. Now, this is not a description of religious zealotry. This is a description of the scientific method. So, on that note, I'm going to wrap up. David and I are going to hang around afterwards for anyone that has questions. Next week, we're going to take all the stuff that we've discussed over the last 12 weeks, and we're going to join the dots, and we're going to say, okay, we started with this vision of science, and we started with this vision of religion, and then we kind of blew the doors off science and attempted to put it back together piece by piece, blew the doors off religion, attempted to put it back together piece by piece, looked at aspects of all of that, of what is real, what is a person, what is knowledge, what do we know, what do we understand. Now, the dust has settled, and we're going to say, okay, we started with a whole pile of questions about how science and religion relate to each other and what it means. And next week, the two of us are going to sit down and we're going to say, let's try and reassemble this. If our blog is called Reassembling Reality, we've blown the doors off, Julie. Now we're actually going to try and reassemble it and say, okay, where have we got to? So I look forward to that. Thank you very much.